The orbital station Nexus Prime buzzed with activity as representatives from 12 different species gathered for the Galactic Combat Tournament. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the viewport, watching ships dock from across known space. His weathered hands traced the edge of his military jacket, feeling the familiar weight of expectation that came with being humanity's sole representative. The tournament wasn't just about glory. The winning species would gain exclusive mining rights to the Kepler 442 system, rich with rare Earth elements that could power civilizations for centuries. Earth desperately needed those resources. Their colonies were expanding, but raw materials were becoming scarce. This tournament was humanity's best shot at securing their future. Jake had earned his spot through years of combat in the frontier wars, where human colonies defended themselves against raiders and hostile alien factions. He wasn't the strongest fighter humanity had, but he was the smartest. His tactical mind had saved countless lives, and his unconventional fighting style had never failed him. The tournament arena occupied the central hub of Nexus Prime. A massive dome stretched overhead, its transparent aluminum walls offering a view of the stars beyond. The fighting platform itself was a circle of reinforced titanium, 50 meters across, surrounded by energy barriers that could contain weapons fire from most known species. As Jake entered the arena complex, he felt the weight of alien gazes upon him. Humans were still considered newcomers to galactic society. Most species had been traveling between stars for thousands of years before Earth even discovered fire. To them, humans were primitive, weak, and unworthy of respect. The other contestants were already assembled in the preparation area. Jake's eyes swept across them, cataloging potential threats. The Karathi delegation brought their champion, a 7-foot-tall warrior whose chitinous armor gleamed under the artificial lights. Their species was known for incredible physical strength and nearly impenetrable natural defenses. The Zephyrian representative floated nearby, its gaseous form contained within a specialized environmental suit. Zephyrians could alter their density at will, becoming nearly insubstantial to avoid attacks or dense enough to crush opponents. Fighting one required perfect timing and an understanding of physics that most species lacked. But it was the Valdoran delegation that commanded the most attention. Princess Zara Thyss stood at their center, her regal bearing unmistakable even among aliens. The Valdorans were the galaxy's most ancient and powerful civilization. Their technology was so advanced that other species often mistook it for magic. Princess Zara Thyss herself was a legend. She had never lost a single combat, and her victories were spoken of in whispered tones across the galaxy. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her humanoid form covered in scales that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the light. Forearms extended from her torso, each capable of independent movement with inhuman speed and precision. Her eyes were large and multifaceted like a predator's, capable of tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Most intimidating of all were the bioelectric organs visible beneath her translucent skin, crackling with stored energy that could be discharged as devastating lightning attacks. Jake watched as she addressed the assembled contestants. Her voice carried the authority of someone born to rule, speaking in perfect galactic standard that somehow made everyone else's pronunciation sound clumsy by comparison. Fellow warriors, she began, her forearms gesturing gracefully, I have traveled far to participate in this tournament, though I confess I do not expect to find worthy opposition. The Valdoran Empire has remained undefeated in combat for over 10,000 years. Our techniques have been perfected through millennia of warfare against species you have never even heard of. Her multifaceted eyes swept across the other contestants dismissively. I have studied the combat records of each of your species. The Karathi rely too heavily on brute force. The Zephyrians lack the discipline to maintain focus in extended combat. The Nexari are skilled but predictable. As for the others. She paused, her gaze lingering on Jake for a moment before moving on. I see no evidence that any of you possess the tactical sophistication necessary to challenge Valdoran supremacy. The princess gestured to her retinue, and one of her advisors stepped forward carrying an ornate weapon. It appeared to be a staff about 6 feet long, but, as she grasped it, the weapon began to transform. Segments extended and locked into place, additional components emerged from hidden compartments, and energy conduits began to glow with contained power. Within seconds, she held what could only be described as a technological masterpiece that combined elements of staff, rifle, sword, and shield into a single adaptive weapon. "This is Stormbreaker," she announced, twirling the weapon with casual expertise. "It has tasted the defeat of champions from 47 different species. Today, it shall add your species to its collection." The alien contestants shifted nervously. Several of them exchanged glances that suggested they were reconsidering their participation. The princess's reputation wasn't just based on stories, her presence radiated an aura of competence and deadly precision that was impossible to fake. Jake, however, remained unmoved. He had faced seemingly impossible odds before. During the Battle of Titan's Gate, he had held a critical passage against an entire battalion of marauder mechs with nothing but a squad of marines and his tactical genius. He had learned long ago that reputation and intimidation were just another form of psychological warfare. "Impressive weapon," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly across the preparation area. "Though I've found that the fanciest gear doesn't always belong to the best fighter." Princess Zara Thyss turned her full attention to him for the first time. Her multifaceted eyes focused on his face, then swept down his form with predatory interest. Jake stood just under 6 feet tall, his build lean rather than bulky, with graying hair that showed his age. Compared to the other alien champions, he looked distinctly underwhelming. "The human," she said, and there was something almost amused in her tone. "I have read about your species' recent entry into galactic society. Your people have shown remarkable adaptability for primitives, I will grant you that. But adaptability and combat prowess are very different things." Jake shrugged casually. "I suppose we'll find out." The princess's scaled lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Indeed we shall. Your species' combat records make for interesting reading. Individual humans have occasionally shown impressive tactical thinking, but you lack the physical capabilities and technological advancement to compete at this level. Your weapons are crude, your armor is basic, and your physiological limitations are well documented." She took a step closer, her height advantage becoming more pronounced. "I am curious, though. What makes a human think he can stand against the galaxy's elite warriors? Is it ignorance of your own limitations, or do you possess some hidden advantage that our intelligence networks have missed?" Jake met her gaze steadily. "Maybe a little of both." Before the princess could respond, tournament officials entered the preparation area. The lead official, a Nexari with crystalline skin that refracted light in rainbow patterns, called for attention. "Contestants, the tournament brackets have been finalized. Combat will begin in 1 standard hour. You will fight in single elimination rounds until only one champion remains. Standard tournament rules apply: victory by submission, unconsciousness, or death. Weapons and equipment must be declared and approved before combat begins." Jake raised his hand. "I'd like to declare my equipment." The official gestured for him to proceed. Jake removed his military jacket, revealing a simple black tank top underneath. Several of the alien contestants laughed outright when they saw his modest physique compared to their own enhanced forms. But Princess Zara Thyss wasn't laughing. Her eyes had focused intently on something else entirely. Covering Jake's left arm from shoulder to wrist was an intricate tattoo. At first glance, it appeared to be purely decorative, a complex pattern of interlocking geometric shapes and flowing lines rendered in deep black ink. But, as the princess studied it more closely, her expression began to change. The tattoo wasn't random artwork. The geometric patterns were mathematical equations rendered in visual form. The flowing lines were circuit diagrams for advanced technological systems. And, woven throughout the entire design were symbols that she recognized but had never expected to see on a primitive human. "Impossible," she whispered, taking an involuntary step backward. Jake noticed her reaction and rolled his shoulder, causing the tattoo to shift and reveal additional details. More symbols became visible, and the princess's eyes widened further. Her 4 hands clenched into fists, and the bioelectric organs beneath her skin began to pulse more rapidly. "Where did you get that marking?" she demanded, her voice sharp with something that might have been fear. Jake looked down at his arm as if seeing the tattoo for the first time. "This old thing?" Got it during my tour in the Frontier Wars. Seemed like a good idea at the time. But Princess Zara Thyss wasn't buying his casual dismissal. She recognized the symbols because they were sacred to Valdoran culture. More than sacred, they were secret. The innermost mysteries of Valdoran combat techniques, technological principles, and philosophical teachings were encoded in those markings. Knowledge that was supposed to be impossible for any non-Valdoran to possess. You cannot have acquired that knowledge through normal means, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Those symbols are protected by quantum encryption, psychic barriers, and temporal locks. No human should even be able to perceive them, let alone understand them well enough to incorporate them into a tattoo. Jake met her gaze with calm confidence. Funny thing about assumptions. They have a way of getting you into trouble. The princess studied him with new intensity. His casual demeanor hadn't changed, but now she was looking deeper. The way he stood showed perfect balance and awareness of his surroundings. His breathing was controlled and efficient. His eyes missed nothing, constantly tracking the positions and movements of everyone around him. These were not the traits of a primitive warrior stumbling around in the dark. This was a predator who knew exactly what he was capable of. The knowledge encoded in that tattoo, she continued, represents thousands of years of Valdoran advancement. Our greatest masters spend centuries learning even fragments of what you display so casually. If you truly understand those symbols, then, you are far more dangerous than any of us realized. Jake shrugged again. Or maybe I just liked the design. But his words carried an undertone that suggested he understood exactly what he was showing her. The princess felt a chill run down her spine as the full implications began to sink in. If this human truly possessed advanced Valdoran combat knowledge, then everything she thought she knew about the tournament had just changed. The other contestants had fallen silent, sensing the sudden tension between the princess and the human. They didn't understand the significance of the tattoo, but Princess Zara Thyss's reaction made it clear that something important was happening. I withdraw my earlier assessment of your species' capabilities, the princess said carefully. It appears that humans may be more complex than our intelligence indicated. Jake smiled for the first time since entering the arena. We're full of surprises. The tournament official cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the matter at hand. All equipment declarations must be completed within the next 10 minutes. Contestants, please finalize your preparations. As the other aliens moved to check their weapons and armor, Princess Zara Thyss remained focused on Jake. Her mind raced through tactical calculations, trying to determine how much he might actually know about Valdoran combat techniques. If he understood even a fraction of what his tattoo suggested, then her usual strategies might not be sufficient. Jake, meanwhile, was conducting his own assessment. He had gotten the reaction he was hoping for, but now came the dangerous part. The princess was no longer underestimating him, which meant she would be fighting at full capacity from the beginning. He would need to be very careful about when and how he revealed the true extent of his capabilities. The next hour would determine not just who won the tournament, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the Valdoran Empire. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the familiar thrill of facing impossible odds with nothing but his skill and determination to see him through. The tournament was about to begin, and everything had changed. The first rounds of the tournament proceeded exactly as Princess Zara Thyss had predicted. The Karathi champion crushed his opponent with overwhelming physical force, his natural armor absorbing energy blasts that would have vaporized most organic beings. The Zephyrian representative phased through multiple attacks before condensing into a form dense enough to shatter his opponent's weapon with a single strike. Jake watched each battle carefully from the contestant viewing area, analyzing fighting styles and noting weaknesses. His first opponent was a Nexari warrior whose crystalline body could refract energy attacks in unpredictable directions. Most fighters would try to overpower such defenses, but Jake had other plans. When his name was called, Jake walked onto the tournament platform carrying only a simple combat knife and wearing basic body armor that looked primitive compared to the advanced equipment of other contestants. The Nexari warrior, whose name was announced as Prism Singer Veltar, seemed almost insulted by the human's modest preparations. This is the human champion? Veltar asked, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's amplification system. His crystalline form caught the arena lights and scattered them in dazzling patterns across the fighting platform. I had heard your species was primitive, but I did not expect them to send a warrior equipped for tribal combat to face galactic champions. Jake took his position at the center of the fighting circle and checked his knife's edge with professional calm. Sometimes simple tools work best. The tournament referee, a neutral AI construct that could process combat at superhuman speeds, announced the beginning of the match. Veltar immediately launched into a complex attack pattern, his crystalline limbs extending and retracting while channeling energy blasts that ricocheted off his own body in unpredictable angles. To most observers, it looked like Jake was in serious trouble. Energy bolts filled the air around him, coming from directions that seemed to change randomly as they bounced off Veltar's reflective surface. But Jake moved through the chaos with fluid precision, never quite where the attacks expected him to be. Princess Zara Thys leaned forward in the viewing area, her multifaceted eyes tracking Jake's movements with professional interest. She could see what the other spectators missed. Jake wasn't just dodging randomly, he was reading the mathematical relationships between Veltar's body position, the angle of energy reflection, and the timing of each attack. He was solving complex physics problems in real time and using that knowledge to predict exactly where each energy bolt would be. But, more than that, she could see him applying principles encoded in his tattoo. Ancient Valdoran combat philosophy emphasized the idea of flowing like water between the spaces where violence cannot exist. Jake was demonstrating that principle with stunning precision, finding the exact positions where Veltar's attacks could not reach him. The crowd grew silent as they realized Jake hadn't been hit by a single attack despite being surrounded by what looked like a light show of deadly energy. Veltar was beginning to show signs of frustration, his attack patterns becoming more aggressive but also more predictable. That's when Jake struck. Instead of continuing to evade, he suddenly moved directly toward Veltar during a gap between energy volleys. His knife came up in a precise arc that found the one weak point in Nexary anatomy that most species didn't know about, a small spot where the crystalline structures of their body intersected in a way that could cause catastrophic resonance failure if struck at exactly the right frequency. Jake's blade connected with Veltar's shoulder and hummed with a specific vibration that Jake generated by flexing his wrist in a particular pattern. The resonance spread through Veltar's crystalline body like a wave, disrupting his ability to channel energy and causing him to collapse as his structural integrity temporarily failed. The referee announced Jake's victory, and the human walked off the platform as casually as he had entered. But Princess Zara Thys was no longer casual in her observation of him. What Jake had just demonstrated required intimate knowledge of Nexary physiology, advanced understanding of vibrational mechanics, and perfect timing that bordered on the supernatural. The tattoo on his arm wasn't just decorative. He was actually applying the knowledge it represented. As the tournament continued, Jake faced increasingly dangerous opponents. Each victory was more impressive than the last, and each one demonstrated combat techniques that should have been impossible for a human to know. Against a Thorian berserker whose rage made him immune to pain, Jake used pressure point techniques that disrupted neural pathways in ways that were supposed to be known only to Valdoran healing masters. Against a quantum shifter who could exist in multiple probability states simultaneously, Jake employed temporal prediction methods that allowed him to strike the one reality where his opponent was vulnerable. Princess Zara Thys found herself in the uncomfortable position of being impressed by a member of what she had considered a primitive species. Each of Jake's victories revealed new layers of knowledge and skill that challenged everything the Valdoran Empire believed about human capabilities. When Jake's semi-final match was announced, she realized with growing certainty that they would face each other in the final round. Her own semi-final opponent was the Karathi champion, whose brutal strength had carried him through every previous match. But Princess Zara Thys was operating on a completely different level. Her battle was a masterpiece of controlled violence. Stormbreaker flowed through its various configurations like a living thing, adapting to counter every attack the Karathi champion attempted. The princess fought with forearmed coordination that allowed her to maintain offense and defense simultaneously while channeling bioelectric attacks that overloaded her opponent's natural armor. The match ended when she configured Stormbreaker into its siege cannon mode and fired a concentrated energy blast that penetrated the Karathi's defenses without killing him. The champion yielded immediately, recognizing that she could have ended his life if she had chosen to do so. As Princess Zara THYSS walked off the platform, her eyes found Jake in the viewing area. He was studying her combat techniques with the same analytical intensity she had been applying to his matches. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was being evaluated by someone who might actually understand the full scope of her abilities. The tournament break allowed contestants to rest and prepare for the final round. Jake found himself alone in a preparation chamber, checking his equipment and mentally reviewing everything he had learned about Valdoran combat techniques. The tattoo on his arm seemed to pulse with significance as he traced some of the more complex symbols with his finger. He wasn't alone for long. Princess Zara THYSS entered the chamber without invitation, her presence filling the space with an aura of controlled power. She had changed from her formal royal garments into practical combat attire that accentuated her alien physiology while providing maximum freedom of movement. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. Jake looked up from his equipment check. "About what?" "About the knowledge you carry." She gestured to his tattoo. "I have spent the last 2 hours consulting with the most advanced AI systems in the Valdoran fleet, trying to understand how a human could possess symbols that represent our deepest secrets." "Do you know what they told me?" Jake waited for her to continue. "They told me it was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. The quantum encryption alone should prevent any non-Valdoran mind from even perceiving those symbols, let alone understanding them well enough to reproduce them in permanent form. Yet there they are, marking your skin like a casual decoration." She took a step closer, her forearms moving in subtle gestures that Jake recognized as defensive positioning. "So I will ask you directly, human. How did you acquire knowledge that should not exist outside my species?" Jake stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. "That's a complicated question." "Then, give me a complicated answer." Jake was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth to reveal. Finally, he spoke. "During the Frontier Wars, my unit was sent to investigate a derelict ship that had been drifting in deep space for an unknown period. The ship was clearly alien, but not like anything in our databases. When we boarded it, we found the crew dead, but their technology was still active." Princess Zara THYSS's eyes narrowed. "Continue." "The ship's computer systems were incredibly advanced, but they were also damaged. Most of the data was corrupted or inaccessible. But there were fragments of information that could be retrieved. Combat techniques, technological principles, philosophical concepts. All encoded in symbolic languages that our computers couldn't translate." Jake rolled his shoulder, causing the tattoo to shift and reveal new details. "I spent months studying those symbols, trying to understand what they meant. Most of it was beyond me, but some of the patterns started to make sense. I had the most important ones tattooed on my arm so I wouldn't forget them." "You found a derelict Valdoran ship," the princess said, her voice flat with implications. "That would be my guess. Though at the time, I didn't know what Valdorans were." Princess Zara THYSS was silent for a long time, processing this information. A derelict Valdoran ship would explain how Jake had gained access to their knowledge, but it raised even more disturbing questions. Valdoran ships were supposed to be impossible to board by unauthorized personnel. Their AI systems should have self-destructed rather than allow their secrets to be compromised. Unless the ship had been destroyed by something that could overcome Valdoran defenses. Something that posed a threat even to the galaxy's most advanced civilization. "The ship," she said carefully. "Did you determine what had killed the crew?" Jake's expression became grim. "We tried. The damage patterns suggested they had been fighting something, but whatever it wasn't using conventional weapons. The crew members we found looked like they had been drained of life force rather than killed by physical trauma." A chill ran down the princess's spine. She knew of only one type of enemy that could kill Valdorans in such a manner, and the implications were terrifying. If the Devourers had returned from beyond the galactic rim, then every species in known space was in mortal danger. But that was a concern for another time. Right now, she had a tournament to finish and a human opponent whose capabilities were becoming more mysterious by the moment. "How much of the knowledge did you manage to decode?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "Enough to get by." Most of it is still beyond my understanding, but I've learned to recognize patterns and apply concepts even when I don't fully grasp the underlying principles. The princess studied him with new respect. What he was describing required extraordinary intelligence and intuition. To learn advanced Valdoran concepts through pattern recognition alone was an achievement that would have impressed her species' greatest scholars. You realize, she said slowly, that this tournament has become something far more significant than either of us originally expected. Jake nodded. I figured that out when you recognized my tattoo. This isn't just about mining rights anymore, is it? No, Princess Zara THYSS confirmed. This has become a test of whether humanity deserves recognition as a true galactic power. If you can stand against Valdoran combat mastery using our own techniques, then your species has proven itself worthy of respect and alliance. If you cannot, then humanity will remain classified as a primitive civilization unworthy of serious consideration. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility settle on his shoulders. He was no longer just fighting for Earth's mining rights, he was fighting for humanity's place in galactic society. No pressure, he said with grim humor. The princess almost smiled at that. Indeed. Shall we proceed to the arena and settle this matter? Jake gathered his simple equipment and followed her toward the final battleground. Behind them, the weight of two civilizations' futures hung in the balance, waiting to be decided by combat between a human warrior and an alien princess whose capabilities spanned the galaxy's most advanced knowledge. The final round was about to begin. The arena had transformed for the final match. Additional seating had been activated to accommodate representatives from every major galactic civilization who had arrived to witness the unprecedented contest. The energy barriers around the fighting platform had been reinforced to contain weapons capable of planetary destruction, and medical teams from a dozen different species stood ready to intervene if necessary. Princess Zara THYSS stood at one end of the platform, Stormbreaker held casually in two of her four hands while the other two traced complex patterns in the air that caused reality to shimmer around her. She was no longer simply a tournament contestant, she had become the embodiment of Valdoran superiority, carrying the reputation of the galaxy's most advanced civilization. At the opposite end, Jake looked almost absurdly outmatched. His simple knife and basic armor seemed laughable compared to the technological marvel facing him. But the tattoo on his arm had caught the attention of every alien scholar in the viewing areas. Those with sufficient knowledge to recognize Valdoran symbols were frantically trying to understand how a human had acquired such markings. The tournament AI announced the beginning of the final match with ceremonial gravity befitting the occasion. Representatives of the Valdoran Empire and Earth, you fight not only for victory in this tournament but for the standing of your civilizations in galactic society. Combat may proceed until one contestant yields, becomes incapacitated, or dies. Begin. Princess Zara THYSS moved first, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of attacking immediately, she shifted Stormbreaker into its analysis mode and began scanning Jake with sensor arrays that could detect everything from quantum fluctuations to genetic markers. What she discovered made her pause in surprise. Jake's human physiology had been subtly modified. His bone density was increased beyond normal human parameters. His nervous system showed signs of enhancement that would improve reaction time and sensory processing. His muscle fibers had been optimized for both strength and endurance in ways that suggested careful bioengineering rather than natural development. But, most intriguingly, his brain showed neural pathway formations that were completely unprecedented in human anatomy. The patterns matched theoretical models for consciousness structures that could process multi-dimensional information and temporal variance calculations. In effect, Jake had been transformed into something more than baseline human. Fascinating, the princess murmured, her voice carrying across the arena's amplification system. You are not entirely human anymore, are you? Jake began moving in a slow circle around the edge of the platform, his movements precise and measured. The ship I told you about wasn't just carrying information. Its medical systems were still functional, and they made some improvements while I was studying the symbols. Seemed rude to refuse. The princess felt a chill of recognition. If a derelict Valdoran ship's AI had determined that Jake was worthy of biological enhancement, then it had recognized something in him that went beyond normal human potential. Veldoran medical technology could theoretically transform any species into something approaching their own capabilities, but it would only do so for individuals who demonstrated exceptional compatibility with Veldoran philosophy and tactical thinking. She was no longer facing a human who had learned some Veldoran techniques. She was facing a being who had been deliberately shaped by Veldoran technology to serve as a bridge between civilizations. "Then, this is truly a test of our respective capabilities," she said, shifting Stormbreaker into its primary combat configuration. "Let us see how well my ancestors' technology has served you." The princess launched herself forward with speed that blurred the boundaries of perception. Stormbreaker extended into its spear form while energy conduits along its length began charging for a devastating close-range attack. Most opponents would have been overwhelmed by the sheer speed and complexity of her assault. Jake, however, was no longer operating according to human limitations. His enhanced nervous system processed the attack with computer-like precision, analyzing trajectory, timing, and probable variations with speed that matched her own. Instead of trying to block or evade, he moved into the attack at an angle that should have been suicidal. But the angle was calculated according to principles encoded in his tattoo. By positioning himself at exactly the right point relative to her momentum and weapon configuration, he created a situation where her attack could not be adjusted to reach him. She flowed past him like water around a stone, her spear thrust missing by millimeters while his knife traced a line across her ribs that would have been fatal if she hadn't been wearing advanced armor. The princess spun and reconfigured Stormbreaker into its defensive shield mode just in time to block Jake's follow-up attack. Energy sparked between them as his knife struck the shield's surface, but instead of bouncing off harmlessly, the blade seemed to stick to the energy field for a moment before pulling free with a sound like tearing fabric. Princess Zara Thyss stared at Jake's knife with new understanding. It wasn't just a simple combat blade. The metal had been treated with processes that allowed it to interact with energy fields in ways that should have been impossible. Another gift from the derelict ship's technology. Impressive, she acknowledged, backing away to reassess her strategy. You have learned to combine human tactical thinking with Veldoran technological advantages. But there are levels of knowledge that cannot be acquired through study alone. She began moving through a complex kata, her forearms tracing patterns in the air while Stormbreaker flowed through configurations that existed outside normal three-dimensional space. Reality bent around her as she activated capabilities that transcended conventional physics, drawing on power sources that tapped into the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Jake watched her display with calm attention, his enhanced vision tracking movements that would have been invisible to baseline human perception. The symbols on his tattoo began to glow with soft light as his modified neural pathways processed the mathematical relationships underlying her techniques. When the princess completed her kata, she wasn't just holding Stormbreaker anymore. She had become something resembling a force of nature, her bioelectric organs synchronized with the weapon's power matrix in ways that turned her entire body into a weapon capable of affecting matter at the molecular level. This is why the Veldoran Empire has remained supreme for 10,000 years, she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that caused the arena's walls to vibrate. We do not merely use technology. We become one with it. She attacked again, but this time the assault came from multiple directions simultaneously as she manipulated spacetime to create temporal echoes of herself. Jake found himself facing not one opponent but 7, each striking from a different angle with perfect coordination. For most beings, such an attack would have been instantly fatal. But Jake's enhanced consciousness was capable of perceiving multiple timeline probabilities, and his modified reflexes could respond to temporal variations in ways that normal nervous systems could not process. Instead of trying to fight all 7 versions of the princess simultaneously, Jake focused on identifying which one represented her actual position in the current timeline. The others were projections created by temporal manipulation, dangerous but ultimately not real. By tracking the quantum signatures encoded in his tattoo symbols, he was able to distinguish between genuine threat and temporal shadow. Jake moved through the storm of attacks like a dancer, his knife finding the one real target among the 7 illusions. But Princess Zara Thyss was ready for him. She had been testing his capabilities, and now she knew that he could perceive temporal variance. That knowledge allowed her to prepare a counterstrike that took his enhanced abilities into account. As his knife approached what he had identified as her real position, all 7 versions of the princess suddenly converged into a single point, their combined momentum creating an attack that existed across multiple timelines simultaneously. Jake's blade met Stormbreaker at the exact moment when past, present, and future intersected in a single devastating exchange. Energy exploded outward from the point of contact, overloading the arena's protective barriers and causing emergency systems throughout the station to activate. When the light faded, both fighters were still standing, but Jake's knife had been shattered and a deep crack ran along Stormbreaker's length. Princess Zara Thyss stared at her weapon in shock. Stormbreaker had been forged by master artificers using techniques refined over millennia. For a human blade to damage it, even with technological enhancement, should have been impossible. But, as she examined the crack more closely, she realized what had happened. Jake hadn't simply struck her weapon with greater force. He had hit it at precisely the resonant frequency that would cause structural failure in its specific molecular matrix. That knowledge required understanding of Veldoran metallurgy and quantum mechanics that went far beyond what any derelict ship could have taught him. "You have been enhanced beyond what you told me," she said, her multifaceted eyes studying him with new intensity. "That ship did more than modify your biology. It uploaded information directly into your consciousness." Jake nodded slowly, pieces of his shattered knife falling from his hand. The AI aboard that ship was dying. Its crew was dead, and its systems were failing one by one. But it had a mission to complete, something about preparing for an enemy that was coming from beyond known space. It chose me to carry that mission forward. The princess felt pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. A Veldoran ship on a mission related to external threats. An AI desperate enough to violate every protocol about sharing advanced technology. A human enhanced not just with biological improvements but with downloaded knowledge that could prepare him for conflicts that hadn't yet begun. The Devourers, she whispered, the word carrying implications that made every alien in the viewing area shift nervously. The ship was on reconnaissance duty beyond the galactic rim. They found evidence that the Devourers are returning. Jake's enhanced memory provided him with context that his human origins shouldn't have possessed. The Devourers were entities from dark space between galaxies, creatures that consumed entire civilizations by draining the life force from every living being they encountered. They had been defeated once before by a coalition of ancient species, but that victory had come at the cost of entire civilizations. The AI believed that when they return, no single species will be strong enough to resist them, Jake said. It wanted to create bridges between civilizations, beings who could help forge alliances and share knowledge that might make victory possible. Princess Zara Thyss understood now why this tournament had felt significant beyond its stated purpose. It wasn't just about mining rights or galactic standing. It was about testing whether humanity was ready to join the coalition that would be necessary for survival. "Then, we are not enemies," she said, lowering Stormbreaker to a non-threatening position. "We are potential allies being tested to determine our compatibility." Jake spread his hands, showing that he no longer held weapons. "That's how I see it." The princess looked around the arena at the assembled representatives from dozens of species. All of them were watching intently, waiting to see how this unprecedented confrontation would resolve itself. Her next words would determine not just the outcome of the tournament, but possibly the future of galactic civilization. "Combat between us serves no useful purpose," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the arena. "The human Jake Morrison has demonstrated capabilities that prove his species' worthiness for alliance with the Veldoran Empire. I propose that we declare this contest a draw and work together to prepare for threats that face all of our civilizations." The silence that followed her words was profound. In 10,000 years of galactic history, no tournament champion had ever voluntarily shared victory with an opponent. But the implications of what the princess was suggesting went far beyond tournament protocol. Jake stepped forward and extended his hand in the human gesture of friendship. "I accept your proposal, Princess Zara Thyss. Humanity would be honored to stand with the Veldoran Empire against whatever darkness approaches." The princess reached out with one of her four hands and grasped his, the gesture symbolic but profound. Around them, representatives from every major civilization began to murmur among themselves as they realized they had just witnessed the formation of an alliance that could reshape the balance of galactic power. The tournament AI, faced with an unprecedented situation, finally announced its decision. Contest declared a draw by mutual agreement. Both Earth and the Valdoran Empire will receive equal mining rights to the Kepler 442 system. Tournament concluded. But everyone present knew that the real conclusion was just the beginning. The galaxy was about to face its greatest threat, and the unlikely partnership between a human warrior and an alien princess might be the key to survival. As they walked off the platform together, Jake looked down at his tattoo one more time. The symbols seemed to pulse with approval, as if the dying AI that had chosen him was satisfied with the outcome. Humanity had proven itself worthy of standing among the galaxy's elite civilizations, and the alliance that would be necessary for victory against the Devourers had taken its first crucial step. The tournament was over, but the real battle for the future of the galaxy was just beginning. And, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Valdoran Empire would not be facing that battle alone.